One of our spending bills making its way through Congress was a $1 million earmark from Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, which was an earmark that was supposedly going to a substance abuse clinic, which actually happened to be housed in a restaurant and run by 3 individuals that share the same residential address, according to their IRS paperwork. Tons of red flags. So this is what we saw with the fraud involving the daycare centers. Now we see other earmarks coming directly from members of Congress where it seems fraud is being perpetrated as well. So I raised the issue, and fortunately, the House has now stripped that earmark out of that spending bill. But again, this is how easy money has been flowing to bad actors in Minnesota.
So that was Ilhan Omar, and what's being reported here is that in Congress there's a bill that was going through Congress, and what Ilhan Omar she tried to do, she tried to essentially sneak in $1 million for a Somali-based business in Minnesota, right? The business is called Generational Hope. It is a clinic, it is a substance abuse clinic, and it doesn't sound that bad, right? Because why would she not want to help her community? But the reason why it's raising red flags is because when you do some basic checks, because journalists that were investigating, they were like, why is she sending $1 million to this one company, to this one business, right? And what they found is that that business, it shares the same address with a restaurant, right? It doesn't sound too bad sharing the same address with a restaurant, because you do see that in commercial real estate. But where it starts getting weird is that where 3 people who works for Generational Hope, where they work on the board or something like that, what they found is that on their tax filings, they claim that that same address that's being used for the business, they use it on their tax form as their residential address for tax return purposes, which in a sense, that is a huge red flag, which is the reason why a lot of people, they're now asking, why is Ilhan Omar sending money to this one business? And we have this article to show you that tax documents show the 3 chiefs of Generational Hope, which is that substance abuse clinic where Ilhan Omar is sending $1 million to, is that 3 chiefs of the clinic listed the same address for a 5-bedroom home in Minneapolis as their primary residence. So this in itself is a huge red flag. So I'm wondering what Ilhan Omar and her team is doing. And here I have another article to explain why does this matter. This controversy adds to the ongoing scrutiny over federal earmark spending and the need for greater accountability and transparency in how taxpayer dollars are allocated, especially when they're tied to organizations with potential conflict of interest or unclear oversight. And we can tell that this does not have proper oversight. And the next video that I want to show you is Ilhan Omar, because what we know is that everywhere there's fraud, Ilhan Omar seems to be in the middle of it, right? Because we know her and her husband, they're being investigated for fraud. We know that she's being investigated for immigration fraud, right? And another thing that we have to keep in mind is that when the Feeding Our Future fraud was busted in Minnesota, right, she was in the middle of it because people who were convicted of fraud, they actually donated to her campaign. And I want you to take a look at this of her being confronted about it. Play clip.
And we're joined now by Minnesota Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Margaret.
We have a lot to get to with you, but I want to pick up on where the Treasury Secretary just left off. He alleged that people who were tied to you or your campaign were involved in this broad, brazen scheme to rip off the Minnesota state welfare system. Do you want to respond to that? Do you know what he is referring to?
I really don't, and I don't think the secretary himself understands what he's referring to. We obviously had people who were able to donate to our campaign that were involved. We sent that money back a couple years ago.
It is convenient how these people who were convicted of fraud donated to her campaign. It is convenient how she's always somehow in the middle of fraud, right? And the people that donated to her campaign were essentially Somalis, right? We're talking about people who migrated to this country and they get a whole bunch of handouts. We're talking about welfare. We're talking about free stuff, right? And this is the pattern that I'm seeing. which is the reason why I think Ilhan Omar, she tried to send that money to Minnesota, to these potentially fraudulent businesses, is because what happened is these politicians, they run on the socialist agenda. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to give you free stuff, free this, free that for everyone. And then what they do, they give this money to these fraudulent businesses. And then these fraudulent businesses, they take that money, they pocket that money without providing any service. And what they do, they turn around and donate to people like Ilhan Omar to keep them in power. And because these people are donating to politicians like Ilhan Omar, they're incentivized, right, to give more handouts to these people, which is the reason why I think a lot of these politicians like Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, the whole of them needs to be investigated. If you have fraudsters that are donating to you repeatedly, if you're trying to give money to these potentially fraudulent businesses, if you're in the middle of fraud, I think you should be investigated and held accountable. Let us continue the clip because she was confronted about the Somalians that are essentially ripping off the state in Minnesota, and she tried to deny that Somalians are essentially ripping off the state, that she tried to claim that Somalians are the ones that are most affected. Play clip.
So this was, just for our audience, the Biden-era Justice Department called it the largest COVID fraud scheme in the country. And this was pocketing COVID-era welfare funds, more than $1 billion in taxpayer money that was stolen. It was pretty shocking. Of the 87 people charged, all but 8 are of Somali descent. And that has added to the spotlight being put specifically on your community. Why do you think this fraud was allowed to get so widespread?
Well, I want to say, this also has an impact on Somalis because we are also taxpayers in Minnesota. We also could have benefited from the program and the money that was stolen. And so it's been really frustrating for people to not acknowledge the fact that we're also as Minnesotans, as taxpayers, really.
So what she's doing here is that she's trying to essentially pour water on the fire, right? By claiming that Somalians in Minnesota, that they pay taxes and they're being affected by this. I would say they benefit the most from it, because if you go back and look at a majority of the people who's been accused of, who's been convicted of committing fraud, they're more than likely from Somalia descent or Somalian descent. And the thing is, what we know when she claimed that, oh yeah, Somalians, they're paying taxes, so they're being affected. Now we know that it's false, because data shows that over 81% of Somalians in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right, they live on welfare. We're 81% of households. So the thing is, yeah, you can say, well, they're being affected by it, right? Sure, I'm pretty sure there's that 20%. But at the end of the day, if you pay $20,000 in taxes and the government gives you back $40,000 in taxes and welfare, right? Are you even paying taxes at that point? Because at the end of the day, you're netting $20,000, right? Because the government is giving you handout. You're literally living on the government. Sure, you might be working a small job here, but are you really paying taxes, right? And that would be my argument to that. And as I mentioned, Ilhan Omar, she's in the middle of every fraud you can think about, right? From immigration fraud to all types of fraud, right? Which a lot of people, you just have to question why she's sending money to this one business in Minnesota, right? That's potentially fraudulent, right? Basic research you can do to figure out, well, is this a legitimate business or what? And there are a whole bunch of red flags, right? Maybe she knows something that I don't know. But the thing is, ever since Ilhan Omar, she got into Congress, she's only been getting richer and richer every year. And she's earning about $175,000 a year in salary, right? So the question is, how is she getting so rich, right? How is she getting so rich? That is a question. And which is one of the reasons why her and her husband, they're under investigation, right, for possible fraud. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below. I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Also, please consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.